it's interesting to follow Michelle's clarity through that kind of really clear and structured theoretical kind of lens of looking at mentoring a teaching practice. I suppose I'm going to speak today from more an experiential lens, one where I've had some, but not extensive experience over the years of mentoring both students, teachers, choreographers, artists, practitioners, so quite broad. I mean, I look at you all today and quite a few of you I know. I suppose quite a few of you could be my mentor from this point on even. But I think that's what's really interesting about it, is that often we're always in a constant place of dialogue and exchange and shifting and learning and developing what we do and what we practice. And I think also what's really interesting is the practice we do, and the embodied practice we do, and therefore the embodied relationship that we're having with someone who perhaps needs some kind of guidance or cheerleading or confidence. So just for those of you who don't know who I am, I'm currently the course leader for BA Honours Dance at Leeds Beckett University, and this is a programme that I co-wrote and designed. Before that, I had a short amount of experience working for about a year and a half in a conservatoire institution at the Northern School of Contemporary Dance. And before that, I had 20 years experience of being based in London and working as an independent contemporary dance practitioner. So what that involved as well was teaching across a really wide variety of situations, from professional dancers and companies to students in full-time professional training, students who are not in full-time training but regular training, and then and people all ages and abilities, from who were experienced dancers or recreational and practice something. And I would still, I don't like to call them non-dancers, because I think they are dancers actually, but they just don't do it for their job to earn their income. So, and during that time as well, oh God, I'm starting to dance. But during that time also, I mean, it's been predominantly in the contemporary dance community, and within that I've taught kind of technique and improvisation and choreographic methodologies and creative practices, so lots of different things. And I've also had extensive practice as a yoga teacher, which I've done for about 15 years as well. So that's always kind of feeding into what I'm doing. I have to also say that even though I am, my main job is at the university now, but I still hoof it a bit, and I still feel like, the artistic practice is at the core of my teaching, very much. And I also feel that whenever I meet teachers as well and enter a dialogue with them, I have to remind them that their teaching practice is an artistic practice as well. And that sometimes there's a lack of confidence where if teachers are perhaps not performing or making or showing work, but I do feel actually that the same creative and investigative process that is happening in a teaching environment is very much the same environment in a making environment and a rehearsal environment. So sharing practice in that way is really important, I think, that we recognise that it's such an honourable profession, teaching, and I think I have to really remind teachers of that as well. And even though I've worked predominantly in contemporary practice, there is often some crossover. So I think several years ago I mentored a teacher who was doing an MA in teaching, and she was full-time staff member at London Contemporary Dance School, but she was part of the classical faculty there, so she was predominantly a classical ballet teacher. Really beautiful teaching practice, and she chose me to mentor her because she wanted to do a collaborative project that looked at yoga and Alexander technique and Feldenkrais that I was studying at the time as well, and to find our crossovers. So we did a little bit of a project there. So even though I don't have a huge amount of experience teaching kind of commercial forms of jazz or ballet, I think there's always, we can always meet. We're doing the same thing. We're all dancing, we're all moving our bodies, and we're all finding how we can develop that and shift that and keep questioning that. So that's a little bit of my background that informs what I'm talking about a little bit now. And I feel that also, when I was mentored through Dance UK years ago, actually, I think it was a good 12 years ago, something like that. And I chose a mentor who at that time I really admired their choices in what they were doing. So I had an affinity with their artistic choices, and I felt that was the main driver that allowed me to work with Jane Greenfield, who was then the artistic director of Dance 4 and Not Dance. And I felt like I wanted to talk to someone who I could identify with a little bit in terms of, I admired the work she was doing, and I aspired to that level of practice. So I have a little bit of experience of being the mentee as well as the mentor. And when I've also mentored kind of choreographers or dance performers, I've often, there's not a huge amount of difference, I don't think, between mentoring teachers and mentoring a choreographer or mentoring a dancer. I think we're all dealing with similar issues in a way. Often the mentee is in a place of real transition in their life. They're really considering and addressing their professional development in a really active way. They've decided that I'm at a point of change, but I need to talk about that change with someone or talk through it, or I need some guidance as well about what I may think I want to do, or what I may think I'm capable of doing, but I'm not sure if that's possible or if that's clear or realistic. So often it's interesting when Michelle's talking about these desired goals and being wary of them, and I completely agree in a way. Often, the woman who I'm mentoring at the moment, she arrived at our first meeting with a very specific goal, and of course that's completely gone out the window, quite within an hour or two of even having a really nice conversation about where she's at and what she's thinking about. It was very clear that immediately that goal has now shifted. And even though she thought she might want to go down a very particular route of teaching practice, actually that's almost, the teaching practice is now maybe perhaps running alongside a practice that's about curating and producing work and still being involved in making. So, the ideas that they arrive with might entirely change by the end of the process. And I feel often that for me the biggest part of this mentor relationship is dialogue between us, and finding out where our experience meets a little bit. And for me as well, particularly initially, but actually I think this carries on right the way through, I end up listening an awful lot. And I allow them and give them room to be able to probably for the first time out loud begin to articulate all the things that are going on over and over in their heads. And I think even just giving them that time and space to do that, all of a sudden they're hearing themselves differently for the first time as well, or hearing what their aspirations are, just by the job of trying to tell me what they think those things might be. So for me, a big part of it is allowing ideas to emerge from them as well. So it's like having a supportive space, a holding space to allow them to think through who they are and where they're at, and allow things to emerge that perhaps were just really quite like a small idea in the back of their mind. And of course the dialogue's really important, and then I'm at the same time as they're telling things about themselves to me, I'm also giving back a little bit of information about my experience as well. So I might be going, okay, that reminds me of that time when this happened to me, and it's very similar. And, so that there's a bit of a flow, there's an exchange, there's a creative practice going on. I mean, for me, it's almost like akin to sitting in a studio with a choreographer and working out the piece that you're doing in some kind of way. I think it's a really, really creative process. And of course, each mentee is going to need something completely different from one to the other, to the other, to the other, to the other. And they might identify something particular that they need. So if it's really within this teaching frame, they might want some ideas about kind of practical ideas about writing a degree course or curriculum development or design. Or it might be they want some ideas about how do I observe students and give useful kind of verbal or written feedback to that student. It might be a very particular kind of thing that works within a particular area, but what might be useful for a teacher in, a conservatoire might be very different for someone who's teaching, young people once a week in a little setting, or a teacher who might be going out to work with professional dance companies, teaching their morning class, or somebody who might be doing improvisation. So it's really fluid and flexible. And of course there are, many really fabulous resources out there, books and articles and journals that you can signpost them to about teaching practice. But often, I really enjoy sharing resources that are not directly connected to teaching maybe, or directly connected to practice. So it might be a novel I'm reading, or some kind of philosopher I'm reading maybe, or a bit of a poetry book or whatever, or it makes me think about this kind of music I'm listening to or whatever. But I suppose also what I can only but do as well is meet them from the place where I'm at this moment as well. So what are my current interests in terms of thinking about making work or interacting with people, or the exchange of knowledge or the exchange of information. And for me, oh God, should I have been there, Alice? Shit. So, oh God. But yeah, and remind your mentor to stand in front of the microphone. I'm very sorry about that. But I don't know. I think very much the sharing through narrative and story makes something tangible in a way. I think often how we learn and how the use of metaphor in how we learn is something that can really embed in people in a way that it kind of slips in quite immediately. And I think if we go back to if we keep returning to the fact that we are involved in a practice that is about the body and about movement, and that we're talking about that, and we're talking about ideas of how we are in a space with other people, and how we want to develop what that is, what that activity is, what that relationship is, what are the things that we're thinking about. I think that's really important. So some people really need a little bit of kind of a light thrown on maybe perhaps what they are teaching, and then maybe how they are teaching, or maybe a little bit of both. But I think fundamentally it's also about nurturing their artistic practice as well, their identity as dancers or makers or choreographers or movers. And I think if you are supporting their development as artists and as teaching artists or performing artists or making artists, but actually when you are teaching, you are making, and you are kind of performing in front of a room full of people who are looking at you for knowledge, for information. It's all connected. What we do is all connected. And I think reminding people who are involved in teaching to keep also returning and connecting to artistic practice that is currently happening is super, super key as well. I think people need, oh God, sounds like a love song. People need people, they do. And we as a dance community, I think sometimes when you're teaching, you can get a little bit isolated sometimes, and you're off and you're doing a certain amount of material and you're very busy, and sometimes the material that you're teaching becomes a little bit boring to you or stale, and you need a little bit of kind of input into terms of what it is you are working with, so that you stay engaged as well as your students stay engaged. So I think there's never, a clear-cut checklist of what a person needs or what a mentee needs. I think it's really about dialogue and listening to them and allowing them to almost kind of work it out for themselves, I think. What I can never tell someone what to do. I can tell them what they might need to have in order to do something, maybe, in certain areas. But I think we all know that what we're dealing with as well is it's the information that we're dealing with is not fixed. Thank God, it's always changing, it's always developing, and it's always moving, and that's what is key to how we as a community are really sharing knowledge, sharing practice, sharing skills, and bringing people with us. I think that's about it. I mean, it's very hard for me to kind of wrap it up in a way, because it's kind of not neat, I don't think. And I'm still, when I was thinking about Michelle's where are you on what type of mentor are you, and I thought, I think I'm a bit of a peer, or I think I'm a little bit of a little bit of that person and that person. So I think for me, I'm still really figuring out what it is to be a mentor. I certainly haven't had any mentor training in a way, but I would say that every kind of every class I've done, every stage I've shared with anyone, any choreographic process I've had, any conversation about art or practice or a piece in the bar after the show I've had, every conversation with a peer that I've had, that in some way has been like peer-to-peer mentoring. So all of you have, astounding experience and knowledge. And often people just need to sit with you for a while and to have a conversation a few times, I think. And that's all I'd like to say.